If Terraria's lore is taken biologically,
the Eye of Cthulhu may not be a organ of Cthulhu, but possibly a formerly independent species that evolved into a symbiotic relationship with the Moon Lord over millions and millions of years, which means that the Eye of Cthulhu isn't just a giant eyeball. It may be an entirely different species of parasitic, predatory organisms that evolved to become living eyes for eldritch gods.
An enemy to lovers type of thing, where the Omega YN hates the Alpha CEO originally, but then the Alpha CEO is revealed to have this sad, horrible backstory, and because of that, they grow closer and start making out and start doing things that I can't describe on YouTube. How we go from birds being able to forcibly eject their sibling's sperm to talking about the fourth dimension.
Have you ever wondered how much eye fluid does it take for the continent of Australia to make a law that bans the killing of sentient floating eyes? Well, you don't have to wonder anymore, because today I'm going to find the answer to that question, while also explaining the biomechanics, functions, and origins of our victim, the Eye of Cthulhu. I will drench my pixelated body in his fluid.
Pause, massive pause. I did not mean like that. I did not swing that way. Before we talk about the Eye of Cthulhu himself, let's talk about the anatomy of an eye. So I assume that the Eye of Cthulhu is based on a human eye, as it obviously resembles a human eye. The eye comes with a few things around it to protect it: eyebrows to prevent extra moisture from getting into the eye, eyelashes to guard against dust particles, and eyelids to protect from dense light. The eye is also filled with tons of clear liquid to keep its shape, and is typically surrounded by a layer of fat and kept inside the skull using strap-like eye muscle. Now the eye is made of three different layers: the fibrous layer, the vascular layer, and the inner layer. The fibrous layer is just connective tissue, with the sclera being used as a tough wall to prevent damage, and it also helps to keep the eye shape. It also has the cornea, which is the window for light to actually get in and hit the back of your eye so that the light can be turned into messages for the brain to actually read. The vascular layer contains something known as the choroid, which supplies blood to the eye so it can keep working. We also have the iris, which is the color part of the eye. It lets you take in a certain amount of light into the eye. And let's say, for example, if the light is too intense, right, your pupil, which is basically the middle part of the iris, will dilate to not let in too much light. If there's not enough light, the iris will dilate again, but this time it'll make it wider so that you can take in more light. Now, your eyes are different colors due to two different layers of the iris: the stroma and the epithelium. So cells in the stroma of the iris have these things called melanocytes. Those melanocytes are pigment producing cells that make melanin, the same thing that colors your skin and your hair. Depending on the amount of melanosomes, which are the pigment creating organelles in the melanocytes, that determines your eye color. For example, most humans have brown eyes because we have a ton of melanosomes or melanocytes that make more melanin. For blue eyes, they lack melanosomes. Moving on, past the cornea and the pupil, we have the lens, which is used to focus the light in the eye and project it onto a retina, which does all the light to energy conversion.
Also, if you hold someone's lens in your hand, from their eye, well, not someone, unless sheep counts people. If you hold a sheep lens in your eye, you'll notice that it's really hard. If you spike it onto the ground, it can actually bounce, which is very surprising, because for us humans, we need our lenses to be a bit plastic, because if they get too hard, the lens can't change shape and give us a sharp image, and you'll go blind. With old people, the reason why they can't see that well is because as you age, your lens actually gets harder and harder, which reduces the quality of the images that you're getting and the quality of light that you're getting. Now, we are on to a special part, the retina. The retina is the back of the eyeball, and like I said before, it turns light into nerve signals for our brain to process. In the retina, we have two layers: the pigmented layer that absorbs the light so it won't scatter in the eye, and the neural layer. The neural layer is where all the energy conversion happens. So in the neural layer of the retina, we have three different things: photoreceptors, which turn light to energy; ganglion neurons; and bipolar neurons. Bipolar neurons are a bridge between ganglion and photoreceptors, where light hits the photoreceptors, becomes energy, goes to bipolar neurons, and the bipolar neurons will send that energy to ganglion neurons. The ganglion neurons combine together to form the optic nerve, which sends the signal from the eye directly to a brain. Now, photoreceptors get a lot more complex from here, where we have rods and cones. But before we get into this, I have to thank my goat, Max Schultz. I am probably not pronouncing that name right, but thank God he named it something simple, like rods and cones. Rods because it's shaped like rods, cones because it's shaped like cones. I cannot tell you, and I do not kid you, in some of these courses that I take, they have the craziest names for the simplest things. For example, n-dimensional hypervolume. I took a ecology course, by the way. This is in my ecology textbook, and when I read that, I had a stroke, because we have no reason to be talking about dimensions. This isn't math class. I'm just learning about how animals have sex and why. I put down that textbook and I just took a break for an hour after that, because I just could not process what that word meant. And then I come back to it and I stared at the book for a solid 20 minutes and I could feel my sanity disappearing at an alarming rate. Like, I don't understand what n-dimensional hypervolume is. What's the dimensions for? What's the hypervolume? All it is literally just the conditions an animal needs to survive. That's literally it. Dimensions, or n, is literally just what they need to survive. Like different things, like one dimension will be food, one dimension will be water, whatever. And for some reason they make it into like a cube or like a rectangle or like a triangle. They make it into 3D shapes. And now it seems like a simple concept, but mind you, what makes it so hard to understand is because the name is so confusing. Like what? Like you're reading that for the first time and you're like, n-dimensional hypervolume? This is ecology.
How we go from birds being able to forcibly eject their sibling sperm to talking about the fourth dimension. You know what? I'm just gonna like stop talking about this because let's just say manslaughter may or may not be on my charges after that final exam. Let's just say that. But anyways, back to cones and rods.
Cones can detect fine detail and color, but they lack sensitivity and are only activated in bright lights. These are for your center vision, so like seeing things in front of you. Cones come in red, green, and blue, which correspond to the colors that they're sensitive to. Rods, however, are something you can show up your rectum for a very good time, especially if you have a nice and thick one. I'm just joking. I just want to make sure you were paying attention. Anyways, rods are sensitive and are used for low light environments to provide low detail. They don't pick up much color, only like black and white, and these are mainly used for your peripheral vision.
Like seeing things corner your eye that don't exist, like DJ Khaled.
Call me asparagus.
Now that we've talked about the anatomy, we can finally move on to talk about the Eye of Cthulhu himself and how he will work. The Eye of Cthulhu would commit self-explosion in-game. I'll let you guess what that is. That would be if it spawned in the day. The Eye of Cthulhu is naturally an eye, and it has irises and pupils that work together to control the amount of light that enters the eye. Now, when we take in light, they pass through the pupils and whatever else is in the eye, and they hit the retinas, which have photoreceptors. These photoreceptors take light and turn it into energy, which will be sent to the optic nerve and to the brain. This is all something that I said before. Now, there's a limit to how much these photoreceptors can take. If the light is too bright, your eyes may take in too much light and create too much energy, and too much energy means that your photoreceptors are overloaded and they'll die because they're so overwhelmed. Like, have you ever had the idea, hey, let me blind myself, like just randomly, let me just blind myself. So you just stare directly at the sun. When you stare directly at the sun, you are taking the sun's concentrated rays into your retinas, and your retinas start to burn, which kills off the photoreceptors. This is known as solar retinopathy. So things like that.
Now, have you noticed something about the Eye of Cthulhu? The Eye of Cthulhu, his pupils never dilate. He's just staring into your soul, judging you for your sins, especially a certain group of you people, Empress of Light lovers specifically. So basically, it cannot dilate its pupils. So if it were to spawn in day, it would probably burn its photoreceptors because it has no ability to control the light that it takes in. So you may say, oh, it can just develop stronger photoreceptors to compensate for the amount of light it would take in during the day because it can't dilate its pupils. But that would cost too much energy to develop. So rather than just using energy to build photoreceptors and make a stronger optic nerve, why not just attack at night, since it's easier on your eyes and you can take in as much light as you want. Now, speaking of light, with the Eye of Cthulhu, since it's getting so little light, it would primarily have a high number of rods, because rods, like we mentioned before, are better for low light environments because they're less detailed and they're less sensitive, which explains the Eye of Cthulhu's movements. Now, when you're fighting the Eye of Cthulhu, when he moves, he's not just dashing directly at you looking for an instant kill. It's more like he's taking small precautionary dashes because he doesn't know exactly what's going on. It's like he's seeing something in the dark. You get up from your bed and you slowly move towards it to try and make out what it is, and then if you determine it's a threat, you attack. Kind of the same thing with the Eye of Cthulhu. Even in his second phase, when he's getting more aggressive, before he dashes at you, he'll take these small precautionary movements and then he'll dash right for you.
Speaking of his movement, I want to point out his movement, which makes no sense to me at all, because the eye is massive, right? It's like 13 feet to 14 feet, and it moves with these tiny little tendrils, not to mention it can move fast as hell and it can fly. So, number one, I don't believe that these little meat tendrils are doing anything. I haven't measured them out, but I don't think they can even even come close to moving the eye. Because you see, with a lot of things that do have tendrils, like in nature, like let's say for example, amoebas or sperm cells, their tails make up a significant portion of their bodies. So like their original body might be like 1/3 the size of their tail. And this is because they need powerful long tails to actually propel themselves. The Eye of Cthulhu is using little strap-like protrusions to try and move itself. So I don't think these tendrils are actually for moving. I think these tendrils are more like those strap-like protrusions in our eye that keep our eyes bound to our skulls.
Also, another thing that I find pretty interesting and pretty cool is that the Eye of Cthulhu actually has a condition known as central heterochromia, where essentially the middle part of your eye is actually a different color than the outer part of your eye. So like you'll have your iris and then you'll have a closer area to the pupil. So as you can see, the outer layer of the eye is actually blue, while the more inner area is actually green, which is actually pretty interesting.
And a pretty cool detail that the devs add in.
Now let's talk about the Eye of Cthulhu's state of living. In Terraria lore, the Dryads ripped out the Moon Lord's organs to stop him from destroying all life on the planet, the Eye of Cthulhu being one of these organs. Now that I'm reading that and looking at that, that's really brutal, like damn. Apparently the cultists were supposed to give the Moon Lord like his mechanical replacements, which is where the mech bosses come from, but the cultists were interrupted, so essentially we're fighting some dude's missing organs as well as his prosthetics. And we're also fighting Kenny Easterday if he was made into an eldritch abomination, which is a very interesting messaging. Terraria devs, very interesting.
But back on topic, how is the Eye of Cthulhu surviving, and why is it able to live outside of the Moon Lord himself if it's an organ of the Moon Lord? The simple answer is obviously magic, but sadly I am stupid and I have burdened myself with the idea of this video, so the long answer is a mutualistic relationship. An enemy to lovers type of thing, where the Omega YN hates the Alpha CEO originally, but then the Alpha CEO is revealed to have this sad, horrible backstory, and because of that, they grow closer and start making out and start doing things that I can't describe on YouTube. I'm going on way too many tangents. So a question, what made the Eye of Cthulhu the Eye of Cthulhu? It must have been something else, because for example, endosymbiosis theory, mitochondria didn't start out as mitochondria. They started out as alpha proteobacteria, and those alpha proteobacteria were eaten by prokaryotes over and over and over until they eventually could survive inside the prokaryote and provide the prokaryote with ATP. So a prokaryote decided to give it a home and they live together in harmony.
Also, I'm so sorry if you hear a truck in the background. I don't know what's happening outside. Back on topic though, I believe that what the Eye of Cthulhu was before in ancient history was a single-celled organism, probably a bacteria that was sensitive to light due to having a ton of light sensors, and it was probably predated on by some sort of prokaryote and eventually adapted and survived and gave the prokaryote benefits, and they lived together in harmony. But this is obviously a stretch, but these types of mutualistic relationships exist in nature. You being an example of that, because we evolved from prokaryotes and we have mitochondria, which used to be alpha proteobacteria, but there's also a different type of relationship, a mycorrhizal relationship, where fungi are an extension of plant roots. Now, these fungi help the plant to expand its range of nutrients and also break down phosphorus,
while the plants feed the fungi sugar. This has evolved with both plants and fungi and has been present for 500 million years, and almost 90% of plants use this sort of system. Plants and fungi can generally survive on their own without a mycorrhizal relationship, but their ability to thrive and grow is severely reduced. But things like these examples of coevolution and endosymbiosis don't happen unless these two species are interacting a hell of a lot with each other and putting an extreme amount of pressure on each other. So for this to work, both the Eye of Cthulhu and whatever the Moon Lord is have to be pressuring each other to grow in order to suit each other's needs. What I mean by this is, for example, moths and flowers. Moths like to get nectar from flowers. Flowers want moths to come and get nectar because they can slap on their pollen onto a moth. The moth will go to a new flower and that'll allow the flower to reproduce. So let's say that the moth has only one source of food, and it's this flower. Now this moth is the flower's only pollinator. What will happen is, since they both heavily rely on each other, they'll evolve to accommodate each other, so the flower will make a nectar tube so that the moth can get easier access to the nectar, and the moth will drink up any excess nectar from the tube. So that means the flower can now put more pollen onto a moth so that it can make more kids. Now let's say the flower has many pollinators and a moth has many sources of food. They won't evolve to each other strongly. Because let's say one of the moss flowers got a mutation and involved a trait to have a longer nectar tube than the flower that we just talked about. The moth can just go to a new source of food that has a better ease of access to get nectar, right? And it doesn't need to spend energy to evolve a longer nose to get down to that nectar tube. So again, the two species must be strongly intertwined for coevolution to work. So essentially what could have happened was the Eye of Cthulhu was originally a light-sensitive bacteria, but then in came the Moon Lord prokaryote that kept eating the Eye of Cthulhu over and over and over again. And eventually what happened was, well, they hate each other at first, and then eventually they got to know each other and they realized, hey, I really like this person. And they got closer and closer and they want to keep denying their feelings, but they can't stay away from each other. But eventually their feelings get so strong that they can't take it anymore, and they confess to each other, and then they get married, and then they evolve and adapt to each other, and then they suit each other's needs. And so the Eye of Cthulhu and the Moon Lord have this perfect romance with each other, and they live happily ever after until the Eye of Cthulhu is brutally ripped out from the Moon Lord by the Dryads. And now the Eye of Cthulhu wants its husband back, and it goes searching around the world for its husband. That must have been very confusing. I'm not going to elaborate on that. I will let you guys decide what the hell that means. So in the end, the Eye of Cthulhu, if it were a real biological creature, it probably attacks at night because daylight would overwhelm its photoreceptors and damage his vision. Not only that, but it's very weird. Floating movements suggest that those little tendrils aren't doing anything to propel it. It probably is just there because that was the original thing keeping the Eye of Cthulhu stuck to the Moon Lord's skull. And not only that, the movement also suggests that it also has a high number of pawns because it can't see very well. And if Terraria's lore is taken biologically,
the Eye of Cthulhu may not be a organ of Cthulhu, but possibly a formerly independent species that evolved into a symbiotic relationship with the Moon Lord over millions and millions of years, which means that the Eye of Cthulhu isn't just a giant eyeball. It may be an entirely different species of parasitic predatory organisms that evolved to become living eyes for eldritch gods. Well, thanks for watching. Let me know what else you guys want to see. Like, sub, comment, do whatever. If you sub, I'm not gonna do anything. If you don't sub, I'm not gonna do anything. Bye, and thanks for watching.